18 months after I buried my wife, I found a video she never meant for anyone else to see unless she was already gone. She looked straight into the camera and told me something that made my hands go cold. She said the woman who held me while I cried at her funeral was not who she pretended to be. And in that moment, I realized my wife didn't just leave me memories when she died. She left me a warning. Before I begin, if you've ever lived through betrayal like this or loved someone so deeply that losing them changed the shape of your days, please leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. Your stories matter here. It took me 18 months to touch her laptop again, not because I forgot about it, but because I remembered too much. The laptop sat on the bottom shelf of my study closet, tucked behind a box of old tax papers and a folded blanket that still smelled faintly like her shampoo. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, but the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I was afraid that opening it would make her death real all over again. Afraid that I'd hear her voice in my head and break in ways I hadn't yet. My wife, Emily, had died suddenly. That's the word everyone used, suddenly, like it explained anything. One moment she was laughing at something on her phone, telling me she'd be home late because she was meeting Jessica for coffee. The next, I was standing in a hospital hallway that smelled like disinfectant and grief, listening to a doctor say words like accident and complications and nothing more we could do. Life has a way of shattering without warning, and when it does, you don't hear the sound until long after the pieces have already cut you. Jessica was there from the very beginning. She arrived at the hospital before Emily's parents did. She hugged me so tightly, I remember thinking how strange it was that her arms felt steadier than mine. She cried, loud and openly, telling anyone who would listen that Emily was her sister in every way that mattered. They'd been friends since college, inseparable in that way some people are when they choose each other instead of being born together. I never questioned it. Why would I? Jessica had been part of our lives for years. She'd been in our wedding photos. She'd helped Emily pick out curtains for the living room. She knew where we kept the spare keys. After the funeral, when the house felt too quiet and the nights stretched on like empty highways, Jessica checked on me constantly. She brought casseroles I barely touched. She sat on the floor with me while I sorted through sympathy cards. She reminded me to drink water, to sleep, to breathe. When I cried, she didn't flinch. She just handed me tissues and said Emily would want me to keep living. At the time, that felt like kindness. Looking back now, I can't tell where compassion ended and something else began. The months blurred together the way grief does that to time. I went back to work too soon and came home too tired. Emily's clothes stayed in the closet longer than they should have. Her mug stayed on the counter, washed but never used. The laptop stayed untouched. Every now and then, Jessica would mention it casually. She'd say things like, "Whenever you're ready, you might want to look through her files. There could be photos you'd want to keep." I always nodded and changed the subject. I didn't realize then how closely she watched my reactions. 18 months later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, I finally felt something shift. It wasn't courage. It was exhaustion. I was tired of avoiding rooms in my own house, tired of carrying unanswered questions like stones in my pockets. So I pulled the laptop out, wiped a thin layer of dust off the lid, and sat at Emily's old desk. My hand shook when I opened it. That surprised me. I thought I'd already cried all the tears there were. The laptop powered on slower than I remembered. When the login screen appeared, my chest tightened. I didn't know her password. Or at least I thought I didn't. On impulse, I typed our anniversary date. It unlocked immediately. That small, intimate success broke something open in me. Even in death, she'd made room for me. Her desktop was neat, folders labeled with dates and projects. Emily had always been organized, especially with her freelance work. I clicked through photos first, expecting the usual ache. Vacations, birthdays, silly selfies. I found them and they hurt, but not in the way I'd feared. They felt like proof she existed, that what we had was real. Then I noticed a folder I didn't recognize. It wasn't hidden exactly, but it was buried deep inside another folder labeled Archive. The name of the folder was just a string of numbers and letters, meaningless at first glance. Something about it made my stomach tighten. I told myself I was reading into it. Grief does that. It makes mysteries out of dust. When I clicked the folder, a password prompt appeared. That stopped me cold. Emily had never password protected anything personal from me, or at least I thought she didn't. I tried a few things. Her birthday, our anniversary again. Nothing worked. I was about to give up when I remembered something small and stupid, a joke between us. I typed in the name of the cafe where we had our first date. The folder opened. Inside was only one file, a video. The date stamp showed it had been recorded 4 days before Emily died. I stared at the screen for a long time without clicking play. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't a birthday message. This wasn't a love note. I knew that in my bones. My finger hovered over the trackpad, and for a moment I considered closing the laptop and pretending I'd never seen it. That was my old me talking, the one who thought ignorance was safer than truth. I pressed play. Emily appeared on the screen, sitting exactly where I was now. Same desk, same chair. She looked different. Not sick, not injured, just tense. Her hair was pulled back like she did when she was trying to stay focused. She took a breath before speaking, like someone about to step off a ledge. "If you're watching this," she said softly, "then I didn't get the chance to explain everything." My vision blurred instantly. Hearing her voice, not in memory but in real time, felt like being dropped into cold water. She swallowed and looked off to the side for a second, gathering herself. "I don't know how much time I have, and I don't know if I'm being paranoid. I hope I am, but if I'm not, I need you to promise me something." She leaned closer to the camera, her eyes filling the screen. I noticed then that her hands were shaking. "Don't trust Jessica." The room felt like it tilted. Emily exhaled sharply, like she just said something dangerous. "I know how that sounds, and I know you won't want to believe it. I wouldn't either. But there are things you don't know, things I didn't want to burden you with unless I had to." My chest hurt. My mind raced, trying to reject the words even as they sank in. Jessica. The same Jessica who'd sat across from me just 2 weeks ago, laughing gently, touching my arm, telling me Emily would be proud of me for how I was healing. "I can't explain everything here, not yet, but if I'm gone and you find this, please, please be careful. Look closely, not at what she says, at what she does." The video ended abruptly. The screen went black, reflecting my face back at me. I realized I'd been holding my breath. When I finally inhaled, it came out as something between a sob and a gasp. I pushed the laptop away like it had burned me and stood up too fast, the room spinning. For a long time, I just stood there, one hand on the desk, trying to reconcile the woman I loved with the warning she'd just given me. My wife wasn't dramatic. She wasn't suspicious by nature. If Emily recorded that video, she'd had a reason. And if she was right, then the person I trusted most after her death was someone I didn't know at all. That was the moment my grief changed shape. It stopped being only about loss. It became about fear. I didn't sleep that night. I tried, lying on my side of the bed, staring at the dark outline of the ceiling fan as it spun uselessly above me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily's face on the screen, not smiling, not teasing, warning me. Over and over again, her voice replayed in my head, calm but edged with fear. "Don't trust Jessica." I whispered the words aloud once, just to hear how they sounded in the room. They felt foreign there, like a sentence that didn't belong in our house. By morning, my grief had curdled into something sharper. Suspicion does that. It poisons memories you thought were safe. As I made coffee, I found myself replaying moments I'd never questioned before. Jessica arriving at the hospital so quickly, her insistence on handling the funeral details, the way she gently but firmly suggested I let her help manage some of Emily's unfinished work just until things settle. At the time, I'd been grateful. Now each memory felt like a thread begging to be pulled. I called in sick to work and went back to the laptop. My hands were steadier than I expected. Something in me had already decided that whatever I found, I needed to know. I reopened the encrypted folder, half expecting the video to be gone, like it had been a hallucination. It was still there. I watched it again, this time paying attention to everything but the words. The way Emily's eyes kept darting to the door, the way she lowered her voice near the end, as if afraid of being overheard even though she was alone. That detail stuck with me. Afraid of whom? I started searching through the rest of her files with new eyes. Emails first. Emily had multiple accounts, mostly for work, but one personal address she rarely used. I found it buried in a password manager file. It took time, patience, and more guessing than I care to admit, but eventually I got in. What I found there made my stomach sink. There were emails between Emily and Jessica I'd never seen. Not friendly check-ins or shared jokes. These were tense, clipped messages, full of carefully chosen words. Emily asking questions, Jessica deflecting, Emily pushing back. One email, dated a week before Emily died, stood out. Emily had written, "I'm not comfortable with how this is being handled. I need transparency." Jessica's reply came hours later. "You're overthinking this. Trust me, I've got it under control." Trust me. I leaned back in the chair, my pulse roaring in my ears. What was this? There were attachments referenced that were missing, entire threads that seemed to end abruptly, deleted or moved. I checked the trash folder. Empty. Whoever cleaned this up had done a thorough job. Around noon, my phone buzzed. Jessica's name lit up the screen. For a split second, I considered not answering, letting it go to voicemail. But another part of me, quieter and more determined, wanted to hear her voice now that I knew what Emily had said. I answered. "Hey," Jessica said warmly. "I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up today?" Her tone was the same as always, gentle, concerned, perfectly normal. It made my skin crawl. "I'm okay," I said, forcing my voice to stay even, just sorting through some of Emily's things. There was a pause, just a beat too long. "Oh," she said, "that must be hard." "It is," I replied, "but I think it's time." Another pause. "Well, if you find anything you don't understand, you know I'm here." I almost laughed at that. Almost. "Actually," I said carefully, "I did find something. A video." Silence stretched between us. I imagined her face on the other end, the way her eyes might narrow when she was calculating what to say next. "A video?" she repeated lightly. "Of what?" "Of Emily," I said. "She recorded it just before she died." The silence deepened. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but there was an edge there I hadn't noticed before. What did she say? She talked about being scared, about not knowing who to trust. Jessica exhaled slowly. Grief can do that. Emily was under a lot of stress. So were you. You were helping her with something important, right? Another pause, shorter this time, controlled. I helped where I could. Why are you asking? No reason, I replied. I just wish she'd told me more. Well, she said, her voice brightening artificially, you know Emily. She hated worrying people. She probably didn't mean anything by it. After we hung up, I sat there shaking. She hadn't denied anything. Not really. She'd redirected, minimized, smoothed it over like she always did. And suddenly, Emily's words made more sense. Look closely, not at what she says, at what she does. That afternoon, I drove to the bank. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I was being thorough. Emily and I shared accounts, but she also had a small business account for her freelance income. I'd never touched it after her death. It felt invasive. Now it felt necessary. The teller pulled up the records, and as I scanned the statements, a pattern emerged. Small transfers at first, then larger ones, always to the same external account, an account in Jessica's name. My mouth went dry. I asked for copies of everything. Driving home, my thoughts raced. Emily had been financially careful, almost cautious to a fault. She wouldn't have moved money without telling me, and she definitely wouldn't have sent it all to Jessica without explanation. Unless she hadn't sent it willingly. That night, I dug deeper, cross-referencing dates, emails, bank statements. The transfers lined up with the tense messages I'd found earlier. Each time Emily questioned something, money moved shortly after, like pressure being applied until she complied, or something being taken without her full consent. I thought about the last weeks of Emily's life, how distracted she'd been, how she sometimes stared at her phone, jaw clenched, then forced a smile when I asked what was wrong. She told me it was work stress. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The worst realization came quietly, without drama. If Emily had been afraid of Jessica, and if she died days later under mysterious circumstances, then her death might not have been an accident at all. The idea made me nauseous. I stood up and paced the living room, the familiar space suddenly feeling hostile, like it might be listening. Jessica had been here countless times since Emily's death. She knew the layout, the routines, the vulnerabilities. She'd seen me at my weakest and wrapped it in sympathy. I went back to the video one more time. I noticed something new then. Right before the video cut off, Emily glanced at her wrist, not at a watch, at a bracelet, one Jessica had given her. I remembered it clearly now. Emily had stopped wearing it shortly before she died, saying it irritated her skin. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, nothing felt small anymore. I sat there until the sky outside darkened, the weight of what I'd uncovered pressing down on me. Emily hadn't just left me a warning, she'd left me breadcrumbs, and whether I liked it or not, I was already following them. I just didn't know where they would lead, or what they would cost me. By the third day after finding the video, my life had divided itself cleanly into before and after. Before, when grief was heavy but familiar, like a weight I'd learned to carry. After, when every memory became suspect and every kindness felt like a mask. I moved through my house like a guest, careful not to disturb anything, as if the walls themselves might be listening. I hadn't told anyone what I'd found, not Emily's parents, not my coworkers, and certainly not Jessica. The truth felt fragile, like it might shatter if exposed too soon. I decided I needed help, not emotional help, practical help, someone who could look at this without the fog of love and loss. After some hesitation, I called Mark, an old friend from college who now worked as a digital forensics consultant. We hadn't spoken much since Emily died, but when I told him I'd found something that didn't feel right, he didn't ask many questions. He just said, "Bring the laptop." Mark lived across town in a modest house that smelled like coffee and electronics. He listened quietly as I explained, his expression neutral but attentive. I showed him the video. I showed him the emails. I showed him the bank statements. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his chin. "You're not imagining this," he said finally, "at least not the technical part." "What do you mean?" I asked. He meant, he said, turning the laptop toward himself, "someone put effort into hiding things. Deleting emails this cleanly takes knowledge. And this folder," he tapped the encrypted directory, "this wasn't something Emily set up casually. She was protecting it." "From Jessica," I said. "Possibly," he replied, "or from anyone who might get access to her computer." He worked quietly for hours, running recovery tools, pulling fragments of deleted files from the digital void. I watched the progress bars crawl across the screen, my stomach twisting with every percentage point. Each recovered file felt like a step closer to something I wasn't sure I was ready to face. Late in the afternoon, Mark sat up straighter. "I've got something," he said. He opened a recovered document. It was a draft email from Emily, never sent. The subject line read, "I need this to stop." My heart thudded painfully as I read. Emily had written about feeling pressured, about being threatened, though she didn't use that word explicitly. She described Jessica insisting she signed documents she didn't fully understand, pushing her to transfer funds temporarily, and implying consequences if she didn't cooperate. There was a line near the end that made my vision blur. "I'm starting to feel unsafe, and I don't know how to get out of this without blowing up my entire life." I covered my mouth with my hand. "Why didn't she tell me?" I whispered. Mark didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was gentle. "People don't always protect themselves first. Sometimes they're trying to protect the people they love." The next recovered file was worse, an audio recording, poor quality, recorded on Emily's phone. In it, I could hear Jessica's voice, unmistakable once I knew to listen for it. She sounded frustrated, sharp. "You're being dramatic," Jessica said. "This is the only way this works. If you trust me, everything will be fine." Emily's voice came through quieter. "I don't like this. You're asking too much." A pause, then Jessica again, colder. "You don't really have a choice anymore." The recording ended there. I felt like I was going to be sick. Driving home that night, I kept thinking about the way Jessica had looked at me across cafe tables, the way she'd smiled sadly and talked about moving forward. All that time, she'd known Emily was afraid of her, and she'd stood in my living room, under my roof, offering comfort like it was her right. The next morning, Jessica showed up unannounced. I heard her knock and froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. For a moment, I considered pretending I wasn't home, but she knocked again, more insistently this time. I opened the door. She stood there holding a bag of groceries, her hair pulled back neatly, her expression concerned. "I didn't answer your texts," she said. "I was worried." "I've been busy," I replied. Her eyes flicked past me into the house, assessing. "Can I come in?" Every instinct said no, but I stepped aside. I needed to see her up close, needed to know if I could spot the lie in her face. She set the groceries on the counter like she'd done 100 times before. She said, "I thought I'd make you something. You look tired." "I am," I said. "I haven't been sleeping." She turned to face me, her expression softening. "I know this anniversary period is hard. Grief doesn't run on a schedule." I studied her as she spoke, the practiced empathy, the slight tilt of her head. I wondered how many times she'd rehearsed this version of herself. "Jessica," I said slowly, "did you ever feel like Emily didn't trust you toward the end?" Her hand stilled on the counter, just for a second, but I saw it. "What kind of question is that?" she asked, laughing lightly. Of course she trusted me. We told each other everything. I nodded. Then why did Emily record a video warning me about you? The color drained from her face so quickly it was almost startling. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time since I'd known her, Jessica looked genuinely shaken. She did what? She asked. She told me not to trust you, I said. She said she was scared. She recovered quickly, too quickly. She shook her head, a sad smile returning. Oh God, that's not what it sounds like. Then what is it? I asked. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Emily was under enormous pressure, she said. She was misinterpreting things. I was trying to help her with some financial decisions, and she got overwhelmed. I never meant to scare her. Did you threaten her? I asked quietly. Her eyes flashed. Of course not. Did you take her money? She crossed her arms. She authorized everything. And the recording, I pressed, where you told her she didn't have a choice? Her jaw tightened. You shouldn't be digging through things you don't understand. There it was. Not denial, deflection, control. I understand enough, I said, and I understand why she was afraid. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. The air between us felt brittle, like it might crack if either one of us moved too fast. Finally, Jessica sighed. You're hurting, she said, and you're looking for someone to blame. I won't be that person. She picked up her bag, her movements precise. When you're ready to talk rationally, call me. She left without another word. I locked the door behind her and leaned against it, my knees weak. I knew then that I was past the point of pretending. Whatever this was, it was bigger and darker than I'd imagined, and if Emily died because of it, I owed her more than fear and silence. I owed her the truth. After Jessica left, the house felt contaminated, not in a physical way, but in the sense that something poisonous had passed through and left a residue behind. I opened windows, even though it was cold outside. I wiped down the counter where she'd set the groceries, then stood there feeling ridiculous for doing it, yet unable to stop. Control is a strange thing. When you lose it once, you start grasping for it everywhere else. I knew then that I couldn't handle this alone. Mark had already helped more than I'd expected, but what I was dealing with had crossed out of the digital and into the real world. This wasn't just about files anymore. It was about fear, about manipulation, possibly about murder. The word felt heavy and unreal in my mind, like something that belonged in crime shows, not in my quiet life with Emily. But the more I reviewed the timeline, the harder it became to avoid. Emily died in what the police called an accident, a single-car crash on a familiar road. Wet pavement, poor visibility, no signs of another vehicle involved. Case closed quickly. At the time, I'd been too shattered to question anything. Now, with Emily's voice warning me from beyond the grave, the neatness of that conclusion felt wrong. That night, I pulled out the old police report. I hadn't read it closely before. I hadn't been able to. This time, I forced myself. I read every line, every technical term, every assumption. One detail stood out immediately. Emily's phone had been missing at the scene. Recovered later, they said, found damaged but intact enough to confirm her last calls. At the time, that had seemed reasonable. Phones get thrown in crashes. But now, knowing there had been recordings on that phone, recordings Jessica wouldn't want anyone to hear, the explanation felt thin. The next day, I requested a meeting with the detective who'd handled the case. He was polite but distant, the way people are when they believe something is already resolved. I told him I'd found new information. He raised an eyebrow but agreed to listen. I didn't show him everything, not yet. I told him about the video, about Emily's fear, about the financial pressure. His expression shifted slightly at that, interest replacing routine. Why are you coming forward now? He asked. Because I didn't know then, and because my wife was scared enough to leave me a warning. He leaned back, studying me. Fear doesn't equal foul play, he said carefully. No, I agreed, but it deserves a second look. He promised to review the material if I sent it over. Promises are easy. Action is harder. As I left the station, I didn't feel relieved. I felt exposed, like I'd just painted a target on my back. That fear turned out not to be unfounded. That evening, I noticed my car had been moved, just slightly. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the angle was wrong. The tires weren't aligned the way I always left them. My heart pounded as I checked the doors. Locked, nothing stolen, nothing obvious disturbed. Still, the message felt clear. Someone had been there. I didn't call the police, not yet. Instead, I installed cameras, inside and out. It felt paranoid, but paranoia is just awareness without proof. I wanted proof. 2 nights later, I got it. At 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected. Front yard. I opened the feed with shaking fingers. The image was grainy but unmistakable. A figure stood near my car, hood pulled up, face partially obscured. They moved confidently, like they knew exactly what they were looking for. After a moment, they stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. I rewound the footage again and again. At one point, the porch light caught the side of the figure's face. It was Jessica. My throat closed. I felt something inside me harden, something that had been soft since Emily died. Grief had hollowed me out, but this filled the space with resolve. The next morning, I called Mark and showed him the footage. He didn't hesitate. "You need to protect yourself," he said, "and you need to document everything." I backed up all the files, multiple copies, cloud storage, external drives. I gave one to Mark, another to Emily's parents, though I didn't explain everything yet. I just told them it was important. They trusted me. That trust weighed heavily. Jessica called that afternoon. "I think we need to talk," she said, her voice tight. "I think so too," I replied. We agreed to meet in a public place, a small cafe downtown, neutral ground. I arrived early and chose a table near the window. My heart raced as I watched people come and go. When Jessica walked in, she looked different, tired, tense. The confident composure she usually wore was slipping. She sat across from me without ordering anything. "You've been making some serious accusations," she said quietly. "I've been asking questions," I replied. "There's a difference." "You went to the police," she said. "Yes." Her eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're doing. I know my wife was afraid of you. I know money was taken. I know you lied." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Emily was unstable toward the end. She was spiraling. If you keep pushing this narrative, you're going to ruin her memory." That hit me harder than I'd expected. I clenched my fists under the table. "Don't," I said. "Don't you dare." She sighed, rubbing her temples. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said. "I was trying to help her. She got in too deep, and she panicked." "In too deep with what?" I asked. She hesitated, then smiled thinly. "Things you don't need to know." That was the moment I realized she still thought she was in control, that she believed intimidation would work, that she underestimated how far I was willing to go. "You came to my house in the middle of the night," I said. "Why?" Her eyes flicked away. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I have it on camera," I said calmly. Her face went pale. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe noise hummed around us, oblivious. Finally, she stood up abruptly. "You're making a mistake," she said, "and when this blows up, don't expect me to protect you." She walked out without looking back. I sat there long after she was gone, my coffee untouched. The fear was still there, coiled tight in my chest, but beneath it was something new. Clarity. Emily hadn't just been afraid, she'd been trapped, and Jessica wasn't just a manipulative friend, she was dangerous. As I drove home, I realized something else. Emily knew this would happen. She knew that if she couldn't stop it herself, she needed to leave me a way forward. The video wasn't just a warning, it was a hand reaching back through time, telling me I wasn't crazy, that what I was seeing was real. And I wasn't done yet. The days after the cafe meeting felt like walking through fog that could catch fire at any moment. I went through the motions of life, work, meals, sleep, but everything felt provisional, like I was waiting for something to happen. I checked the camera feeds obsessively. Every passing car made my shoulders tense. Every unknown number that called my phone made my stomach drop. Jessica's warning echoed in my mind, not as a threat, but as confirmation. People don't warn you when they think they're innocent. They warn you when they think they're losing control. I spent hours reconstructing Emily's final weeks. I pulled calendar entries, text logs, location data from apps she'd used without thinking. Patterns emerged slowly, reluctantly, like an image developing an old film. Jessica had been present more than I realized. Meetings that were framed as casual coffee dates lined up suspiciously with bank transfers, phone calls late at night, missed calls Emily never mentioned. It became clear that whatever hold Jessica had over her wasn't accidental or brief. It was sustained, intentional. One evening, as I was reviewing call logs, I noticed a number Emily had called repeatedly in the days before her death. It wasn't saved under a name, just digits. I hesitated, then dialed it. A woman answered. Her voice was cautious but professional. "Hello?" "My name is Daniel," I said. Saying my own name out loud grounded me. "I'm calling about my wife, Emily. She reached out to this number shortly before she died." There was a pause. I heard papers shifting. "I'm not sure I can discuss—" "She was scared," I said quietly, "and I think she was trying to protect me." The line went silent for a long moment. Then the woman sighed. "I can't give details over the phone, but I can tell you this. Your wife contacted our office seeking advice about a financial dispute involving a close associate. She believed she was being coerced." My chest tightened. "Did she name the person?" "Yes," the woman said. "She did." "Was it Jessica?" Another pause. "Yes." After we hung up, I sat in the dark, the phone heavy in my hand. Emily had tried to get help. Quietly, carefully. She hadn't told me because she'd been trying to shield me from exactly what I was facing now. The irony hurt more than I could put into words. Love makes us brave in ways that can also be dangerous. The detective called the next morning. His tone was different this time, more serious. He said they'd reviewed the materials I sent and wanted to reopen certain aspects of the case. He asked me to come in again, to bring everything I had. I agreed, relief and dread tangling together in my chest. At the station, I laid it all out. The video, the recovered emails, the audio recording, the bank statements, the footage of Jessica outside my house at night. I watched the detective's face as he took it in, the skepticism giving way to concern. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and exhaled slowly. "This changes things," he said. "I just want the truth, whatever it is." He nodded. "That's what we want too." As I left, I felt something I hadn't since Emily died. Not hope exactly, but momentum. Things were moving now, beyond my control, and for the first time, that felt like a good thing. Jessica didn't call again. Instead, I heard from her lawyer. The letter was cold and formal, accusing me of defamation, harassment, and emotional distress. Reading it, I felt a familiar flicker of doubt, the old reflex to question myself, to wonder if I'd gone too far. That reflex died quickly. Doubt is a luxury for people who haven't watched their reality fall apart piece by piece. Mark reassured me. Emily's parents reassured me. Even the detective, careful as he was, told me to stay the course. Truth has a way of surviving intimidation. One night, unable to sleep, I returned to the video again. I noticed something I'd missed before. Emily's eyes weren't just afraid, they were determined. There was resolve there, too, like she'd already accepted the possibility that she wouldn't make it out of this unscathed, but she wasn't willing to disappear quietly. "I'm proud of you," I whispered to the screen. The investigation took weeks. During that time, more pieces surfaced. Another account Jessica had access to, another manipulated document, another witness who remembered an argument between Emily and Jessica days before the crash. Each detail tightened the net. Then came the call I'd been bracing for. They'd found evidence suggesting Emily's car had been tampered with. Not enough to declare intent outright, but enough to raise serious questions, enough to shatter the original narrative of a simple accident. I sat down hard when I heard that. The room spun. Even though I'd suspected it, hearing it confirmed felt like losing Emily all over again. Anger surged up, hot and overwhelming, but beneath it was something steadier: purpose. Jessica was brought in for questioning. I wasn't there, but I imagined it vividly. Her practiced calm, her selective memory, her insistence that she'd only ever tried to help. I wondered if, sitting across from professionals trained to see through manipulation, she felt the same loss of control she'd once inflicted on Emily. Days later, the detective called again. "We're not done, but we're closer." I hung up and stood at the window, watching dusk settle over the neighborhood. The world looked the same. Cars passed, lights flicked on in houses. Life went on, indifferent to the quiet battles fought behind closed doors. I thought about the man I'd been 18 months ago, hollow, passive, grateful for any hand that reached towards me, even if it came with strings attached. Grief had made me vulnerable. Jessica had seen that. Emily had known she would. That was the hardest truth to swallow. My wife had anticipated her own erasure, and instead of giving in to fear, she chose to leave me a compass. I didn't know yet how this would end, whether justice would be complete or partial, whether answers would come cleanly or with jagged edges, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I would not look away. Not anymore. Waiting became its own kind of torment. Once the investigation was officially underway, I was told, politely but firmly, to let the process unfold. No more digging, no more confronting, no more reaching out to potential witnesses on my own. I understood why, but understanding didn't make it easier. After months of chasing fragments of truth, being told to sit still felt unbearable. Every instinct in me wanted to keep moving, to keep pulling on threads before they disappeared. In the quiet that followed, grief came back in a different form. Not the raw shock of losing Emily, and not the sharp fear that had driven me forward, but something heavier, something sadder. I started to mourn the version of my life that had existed before I knew what I knew now. The dinners Jessica had sat through, the laughter I'd shared with her, thinking it was harmless, the trust I'd given so freely because I'd been too broken to question it. Emily's parents invited me over for dinner one night. It was the first time we'd sat together like that since the funeral. Her mother cooked too much food, the way she always did when she was nervous. Her father barely touched his plate. After a while, Emily's mother reached across the table and took my hand. "She tried to tell us something," she said quietly. I looked up. "When?" "A few weeks before she died," she said. "She asked some strange questions about legal protections, about what happens if someone close to you betrays your trust." Her voice trembled. "We thought she was just anxious." Guilt washed over me, sharp and sudden. "So did I." Her father cleared his throat. "You couldn't have known," he said. "She didn't want you to." That realization settled deep in my chest. Emily had been surrounded by people who loved her, and still she'd felt alone with this burden. Not because we wouldn't have helped her, but because she believed protecting us mattered more than protecting herself. On the drive home, I cried harder than I had in months. A week later, the detective called me in again. This time, his tone was careful but resolute. "We've uncovered enough to move forward," he said. "I can't share everything yet, but I need you to prepare yourself." "For what?" I asked. "For the possibility that this won't end the way you want it to," he said honestly. "Justice isn't always clean." I appreciated his candor. I also knew he was right. Closure is something people talk about because it sounds comforting, not because it's guaranteed. Jessica was arrested 2 days later. I wasn't there when it happened. I found out through a call from Mark, followed shortly by a notification from a news app I'd forgotten I even had installed. The headline was vague, careful not to speculate. A person of interest, new evidence, investigation ongoing. Still, seeing her name in that context sent a jolt through me that I wasn't prepared for. Relief came first, then anger, then a deep, aching sadness that surprised me with its intensity. Not sadness for her, sadness for the years Emily had trusted someone who would eventually destroy her sense of safety. Sadness for the part of my life that had been built on a lie I hadn't known to question. The arrest didn't bring peace. It brought noise. Reporters called, distant acquaintances reached out with thinly veiled curiosity. People wanted answers I didn't have yet. Some wanted drama. I stopped answering unknown numbers altogether. In the middle of it all, I received a letter. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting immediately. Jessica's. My hands shook as I opened it. She wrote as if nothing had changed, as if this were just another misunderstanding we could talk through if only you'd listen. She denied intent, denied responsibility, claimed Emily had been unstable, that she exaggerated, that fear had twisted her perception of reality. Reading it felt like listening to a broken record, the same manipulations repeated with different phrasing. Near the end, though, the tone shifted. "You think you knew her," she wrote, "but there were things she never told you, secrets she took to her grave. Ask yourself why." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. The words stung, but they didn't land the way she intended. Secrets don't negate truth. They don't excuse harm. All they do is remind us that no one is ever fully known. I handed the letter over to the detective the next day. As the legal process moved forward, I began therapy, not because anyone suggested it, but because I could feel myself fraying at the edges. Talking about Emily without turning every sentence into an accusation or a mystery felt impossible at first. Slowly, though, the sessions became a place where I could grieve her again, not as a victim, but as the woman she was, kind, intelligent, brave in ways I was only beginning to understand. One afternoon, my therapist asked me what I would say to Emily if I could speak to her now. I didn't answer right away. "I'd tell her I'm sorry," I said finally. "Sorry I didn't see the signs. Sorry she felt like she had to carry that alone." "And what else?" she asked gently. "I'd tell her she was right," I said, "about everything." That night I returned to the laptop one last time. I watched the video, not for clues this time, but for connection. Emily's eyes met mine through the screen, steady and unwavering. "I'm listening," I said softly. In the weeks that followed, the case grew stronger. Financial crimes stacked up, more digital evidence surfaced. The tampering with Emily's car was no longer considered incidental. I was told there would be a trial. I prepared myself the only way I knew how, by telling the truth when asked, by not flinching when Emily's name was spoken in past tense, by reminding myself that whatever the outcome, I had honored her warning. Late one evening, as I sat alone in the living room, I realized something quietly profound. For the first time since Emily died, I wasn't afraid of remembering her. The memories no longer felt tainted by doubt. They were hers, untouched by what came later. Jessica had tried to rewrite the story. Emily made sure that didn't happen. And now, so would I. The trial didn't begin with drama. There were no sudden confessions, no cinematic outbursts. It began the way most real reckonings do, quietly, with paperwork and waiting rooms and the dull hum of fluorescent lights. I sat on a hard bench outside the courtroom on the first day, hands folded, feeling older than I had any right to feel. I kept thinking about how Emily would have hated this place. She disliked crowds, disliked being the center of attention, and yet here she was, the invisible center of everything. When they called my name to testify, my legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I stood, walked forward, and took the oath. The courtroom looked smaller from the witness stand, tighter. Jessica sat at the defense table, her posture perfect, her expression carefully neutral. She didn't look at me, not once. That hurt more than I expected, not because I wanted her attention, but because it confirmed something final. Whatever connection we'd once pretended to have was gone, reduced to strategy and silence. The prosecutor asked me to tell our story, not the investigation, not the accusations, just who Emily was. I talked about how she laughed with her whole body, how she cried during documentaries about strangers, how she always believed people meant well, even when they didn't. My voice shook, but I didn't stop. For the first time in months, I wasn't speaking in fragments or evidence. I was speaking as her husband. Then came the hard part, the video, the warning, the way I'd found it, the way my understanding of my own life had shifted in an instant. I felt the courtroom lean in when I repeated her words, "Don't trust Jessica." The defense objected. The judge allowed it. I kept going. I described the fear that had crept in slowly, how memories turned sharp around the edges. I explained the emails, the money, the audio recording. I didn't embellish. I didn't need to. The truth had weight all on its own. When the defense cross-examined me, they tried to unravel that weight. They asked about my grief, my mental state, my reliability as a narrator. They suggested that loss had made me paranoid, that love had made me desperate for meaning. I listened calmly because I'd asked myself those same questions long before they ever did. "Did your wife ever accuse Jessica of intending to harm her?" the attorney asked. "No," I said. "So you're interpreting her fear after the fact," he pressed. "I'm honoring it," I replied. There was a murmur in the room. The judge called for order. Jessica took the stand later that day. Watching her speak was surreal. She was composed, articulate, almost convincing if you didn't know what to listen for. She talked about her friendship with Emily, about how close they were, how devastated she'd been by her death. She painted herself as a helper, a fixer, someone who stepped in when others couldn't. When asked about the money, she framed it as informal loans. When asked about the recordings, she dismissed them as emotional misunderstandings. When asked about being outside my house at night, she said she'd been worried about me, that she'd wanted to check in and lost her nerve. Concern, always concern. I noticed, though, that she never once spoke Emily's name with warmth. She used it like a label, a reference point, never a memory. The most difficult moment came when they played the audio recording in court. Hearing Jessica's voice echo through the room, stripped of context and charm, made my skin prickle. "You don't really have a choice anymore." The words hung there, undeniable. Jessica stared straight ahead as it played. She didn't flinch. I wondered how long she'd practiced that. The trial stretched on for days. Expert witnesses, financial analysts, digital forensic specialists, each one added another brick to the structure of the case. It became less about one dramatic act and more about a pattern, control, pressure, escalation. On the final day, as closing arguments wrapped up, I felt strangely hollow. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. I'd told the truth. I'd brought Emily's voice into the room. That would have to be enough. The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they returned, I held my breath without realizing it. The verdict wasn't absolute. Guilty on multiple counts of financial exploitation and coercion, not guilty on the most severe charge. The courtroom reacted in waves, gasps, whispers, restrained emotion. Justice, but incomplete. Accountability, but not the full measure of truth I'd hoped for. I didn't cry. Not then. I felt tired, deeply bone-weary tired. Jessica was led away, still composed, still refusing to look at me. I watched her go, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet certainty. She no longer had power over my story. In the weeks that followed, life slowly reassembled itself, not into what it had been, but into something survivable. The media attention faded, the calls stopped. The house felt like mine again. I returned to work part-time. I started cooking again, real meals instead of whatever was easiest. I went for long walks in the evenings, letting my thoughts wander without forcing them into order. Grief softened, just enough to make room for something else. Gratitude, maybe, or resolve. One afternoon, Emily's mother called me. She said, "I want to thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For listening to her," she said, even when she wasn't here to explain. That stayed with me. On the anniversary of Emily's death, I visited her grave alone. I brought no flowers, no grand gestures. I just sat and talked. I told her what had happened, what hadn't, what still hurt, what was finally quiet. "I heard you," I said. "I trusted you." As I stood to leave, I realized something that felt like a gift. The warning Emily had left me wasn't only about danger. It was about trust, about learning to listen, even when the truth arrives late and painfully. I walked back to my car, feeling lighter than I had in years. The story didn't end the way stories often do. There was no neat bow, no perfect justice, but there was honesty, and there was love that refused to be erased. And sometimes, that's enough. After the trial, life settled into an unfamiliar rhythm. The adrenaline that had kept me going for months drained away, leaving a quiet ache that wasn't grief exactly, but the residue of it. I spent mornings walking Emily's favorite trails, listening to birds I had never noticed before. Afternoons were for paperwork, financial accounts we had shared, belongings left in her studio, items that at once seemed mundane but now carried the weight of history. I handled everything carefully, deliberately, as if each action honored her memory. The hardest part was the silence. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't since she died, but it was quieter than I had expected. Empty rooms echoed in ways that made me painfully aware of how much I'd taken for granted. I kept her laptop open on the desk, the screen off, as if leaving it there would make it a portal to her presence. Sometimes I swore I could hear her voice, soft and calm, reminding me to breathe, to trust, to continue. One evening, a package arrived. No return address, just my name in neat handwriting. My hands trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a small box containing Emily's bracelet, the one she had stopped wearing shortly before she died. Tucked beneath it was a note, written in her handwriting. "I'm proud of you for listening. Keep trusting your heart." I held it in my hands, letting the cool metal rest against my skin. Tears came then, unbidden, silent, cathartic. For the first time in months, I felt Emily's presence not as a ghost haunting me with fear, but as a compass guiding me toward peace. That small gesture, simple, quiet, impossible to manipulate, reminded me of who she had been, loving, brave, and clear-sighted even in the darkest moments. The months following Jessica's conviction were strange. Friends drifted away, unable or unwilling to navigate the complexities of what had happened. Family was more present than ever. Emily's parents were a constant source of warmth and support, though our conversations were always tinged with sadness. They had lost a daughter, I had lost a wife, and in that shared loss we found a connection that was quiet but unbreakable. I found myself returning to work, slowly rebuilding routines I had abandoned during the investigation. The office was different without Emily around. She had been my anchor, my confidant. But I realized that part of living again meant accepting absence without allowing it to crush the present. I focused on small tasks, letting them ground me, organizing files, completing projects, responding to emails. I noticed small victories, like a perfectly balanced spreadsheet or a client's genuine thanks, and allowed myself a quiet sense of accomplishment. One morning, I received a call from a journalist I had never spoken to before. She wanted to interview me about Emily's story, the warning, the trial. I hesitated. Public attention had never been something Emily valued, and it wasn't something I wanted either. But as I thought about it, I realized that the story wasn't just mine. It was hers. Her courage, her foresight, her insistence that I not trust blindly, those were lessons worth sharing. I agreed to speak, cautiously, emphasizing the narrative was about vigilance, love, and the importance of listening. I spoke about Emily's character, about how she had always protected others even when she could not protect herself. I spoke about the video she had left behind, about the warning that seemed impossible to believe at first. I spoke honestly, without embellishment. The response surprised me. Messages arrived from strangers who had experienced betrayal, who had lost loved ones under mysterious circumstances, who had trusted too easily and suffered for it. They thanked me for sharing the story. I realized that Emily's warning had extended beyond our small circle, resonating in ways I had never anticipated. With time, I began to focus on rebuilding a life that Emily would have wanted me to live, not one dictated by fear. I revisited hobbies we had once enjoyed together, gardening, cooking, reading. I started journaling, capturing memories, lessons, and reflections. Writing became a form of therapy, a way to honor Emily's voice while carving out space for my own. At home, I rearranged the living room. I kept some of Emily's things around, but I also made room for my own choices. I placed her favorite books on a shelf, her coffee mug on the counter, and her photo on the mantel. But I allowed space for myself, too. New art, a small indoor plant she would have teased me for neglecting, objects that reflected my own emerging identity. Evenings became moments of reflection rather than dread. I would sit with the laptop closed in front of me, replaying the memory of the video in my mind. Not the fear, but the clarity in Emily's eyes, the steady resolve of her voice. "Don't trust Jessica," she had said. And through that warning, she had taught me the value of discernment, the courage to question appearances, and the importance of honoring one's instincts. The legal proceedings continued to ripple outward. Appeals and minor challenges from Jessica's defense kept the case in the public eye, but I learned to navigate it with a steady hand. I documented everything meticulously, consulted with a detective when necessary, and avoided being drawn into unnecessary confrontation. Each action, each choice, felt like a tribute to Emily's foresight. Months turned into a year. One evening, as the sun set over the neighborhood, I found myself on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the sky shift from orange to purple. I thought about the man I'd been 18 months ago, the man who had been consumed by grief and fear, unable to act. I thought about the man I had become, the man who had listened, who had acted, who had endured. And I realized that Emily's gift to me was not simply the warning itself, but the empowerment to carry it forward wisely. In that quiet moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The danger was not entirely gone. Jessica's actions had left scars, tangible and intangible, that would never fully heal. But Emily had given me the tools to navigate a world that could be deceptive and cruel. She had given me knowledge, foresight, and the quiet, unwavering moral compass that comes from someone who loved you enough to protect you even from those closest to you. I also realized something about forgiveness, not in the sense of excusing Jessica, but in the sense of freeing myself from the grip of anger that had threatened to consume me. The warning had taught me vigilance, yes, but also clarity. I could honor Emily and still reclaim my life. I could mourn and rebuild simultaneously. I could be careful and still live fully. Weeks later, I organized a small gathering with Emily's family and a few close friends. We shared stories, photographs, and laughter that carried both grief and love. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of continuity, not just the residue of what had been lost, but the living pulse of what remained. Emily's presence, though absent in body, filled the room. Her lesson lived in every careful choice I made, every memory I recounted, every smile that broke through the lingering shadows of loss. That night, I returned home and placed the bracelet Emily had sent me back on the desk. I ran my fingers over it, remembering her voice, her eyes, her courage. I whispered a quiet promise. I will honor you. I will live. I will remember everything you wanted me to see. And for the first time since the day I found that hidden video, I felt a deep, abiding sense of gratitude. Gratitude not only for the warning, but for the woman who had left it. She had trusted me enough to listen, and in doing so, she had given me the strength to survive and to carry forward with clarity, courage, and love. Emily's message, once a chilling warning, had transformed into a guiding light, a reminder that truth, vigilance, and love could coexist even in the face of betrayal and loss. And as I sat in the quiet house, the shadows long in the fading light, I finally understood what it meant to live in her memory, not as a victim of fear, but as a witness to her wisdom, her strength, and her endless care. Even as life began to settle into this new normal, I could feel the lingering echo of Jessica's presence. She wasn't in my house anymore, she wasn't calling, and the trial had stripped her of power. But the shadow she cast over the past year and a half didn't vanish so easily. Some nights I'd wake suddenly, heart racing, convinced I heard the soft click of a door or the tap of footsteps on the porch. Rationally, I knew it was just my imagination, but the fear she had seeded remained, a stubborn echo in the corners of my mind. I tried to fight it, but slowly I realized fear wasn't the enemy. It was the lesson Emily had been trying to teach me all along. Pay attention. Trust your instincts. Don't ignore what doesn't feel right. Fear, when respected and channeled, could be a tool rather than a trap. That idea became my quiet mantra, my way of navigating spaces I had once moved through blindly. In the months that followed, I began going through Emily's personal files again. Not the encrypted ones I had already reviewed, but her journals, notebooks, and sketchbooks. At first, I wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was a need for connection, a desire to see her thoughts unfiltered. What I found, though, surprised me. Emily had recorded her fears and her observations with such clarity, such meticulous care, that it was almost as if she had been preparing for a world she would never fully inhabit. She had written about friendship, trust, and betrayal. She had mapped out scenarios where people close to her could take advantage of her kindness, and she had even described steps to protect herself, steps she had only shared in that hidden video. Reading her words, I felt both admiration and sorrow. Admiration for her foresight, her courage, her love for me. Sorrow because she had carried this alone, even when she could have leaned on others. But there was also a strange comfort in her documentation. Emily had been scared, yes, but she had acted. She had tried to arm me with knowledge and warning, giving me the chance to see clearly what I had been blind to before. One afternoon, while sifting through her files, I came across a folder I had never noticed before. It was labeled simply Aftermath. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were letters Emily had drafted but never sent, to her family, her colleagues, even to me. Each letter reflected her careful mind and her deep empathy. In one, she wrote about the importance of discernment in relationships, about trusting intuition, and about how love could coexist with vigilance. She spoke about resilience, about facing betrayal without letting it define the rest of life. It struck me then how deliberate Emily had been. Even in her final days, she had been planning for my survival. Not just my physical survival, but my emotional and moral survival. She had anticipated every trap, every manipulation, and she had left me breadcrumbs to follow. That realization made my grief both sharper and gentler. Sharp because it reminded me of how alone she had felt. Gentle because it reminded me of how deeply she had loved and trusted me to continue living fully even after she was gone. Around the same time, I reconnected with old friends I had neglected during the chaos of grief and investigation. People who didn't know the full story, who had no idea what had happened, but whose presence reminded me that life still had ordinary joys. We laughed over dinner, we walked in parks, we talked about work and hobbies and mundane frustrations. These moments were ordinary, but ordinary had become extraordinary after everything I had endured. It was grounding in a way I hadn't realized I needed. Despite this growing sense of normalcy, the memory of Jessica's betrayal never fully faded. Occasionally, I would run into news articles covering her appeals or the ongoing legal entanglements surrounding her finances. Each time, a surge of anger and sadness would rise, but instead of letting it consume me, I started using it as a reminder of Emily's lesson: vigilance, discernment, clarity. I could acknowledge the harm she had caused without letting it dominate my life. Then one evening, months after the trial, I received a package from Mark. It was a small, plain envelope with no markings. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "Emily left something you might not have seen. It's time." My hands shook as I inserted the drive into my laptop. The folder that appeared contained video files, Emily speaking directly to the camera again, this time in a series of shorter clips. Unlike the hidden video that had warned me about Jessica, these were reflections, memories, and advice. She spoke about love, about trust, about the importance of observing patterns and listening to one's instincts. She spoke about grief and resilience, about navigating the chaos life throws at us. As I watched, I realized this was Emily's final gift to me, not a warning this time, but guidance. She had left a roadmap for living without her presence, a way to carry her wisdom forward even as the world shifted unpredictably around me. Tears ran down my face, but they were not only of sorrow. They were also of gratitude, of clarity, of profound connection that had survived even the darkest moments. That night, I sat quietly in the living room, the glow of the laptop illuminating the space. I thought about the journey I had been on, from raw grief to suspicion, from fear to understanding, from despair to cautious peace. I thought about how easily I could have been manipulated, how close I had come to letting someone rewrite my life for me. And I thought about Emily, brave, intelligent, and endlessly thoughtful, who had given me the tools to survive, to see clearly, and to live fully despite unimaginable loss. The weeks that followed were quieter, less dramatic. I returned to a routine of work, reflection, and connection with the people that mattered most. I began documenting Emily's story, not as a sensational narrative for others, but as a private record for myself, a way to honor her, remember her, and pass down the lessons she had left behind. Each journal entry, each note felt like a conversation with her across the divide between life and death. One evening, I took the bracelet she had sent me and placed it on the wrist of the hand I had been using to write. I closed my eyes and whispered, "I understand now. I see. I will carry this with me." It was a simple act, but profoundly moving. Emily's presence, though absent physically, was more vivid than ever. By the time a full year had passed since Jessica's conviction, I had developed a sense of equilibrium. The shadow of betrayal no longer controlled my actions or thoughts. Grief was still present, but it had softened into memory and wisdom. I could talk about Emily without breaking down. I could remember her without fear. I could trust myself again, and that trust was the truest tribute I could give her. Emily's warning had been terrifying when I first saw it, but now, looking back, I understood its deeper meaning. It wasn't only about danger or betrayal. It was about awareness, about choosing who to let into your life carefully, about learning to navigate the world without losing yourself. Her foresight had saved me in ways I hadn't fully appreciated until now. Sometimes, late at night, I would return to the first video, the one that had shattered the fragile world I had been clinging to. I would watch her eyes, steady and resolute, and I would remember her courage, and I would realize that the most profound lesson she had given me was not fear, but empowerment. Through her guidance, I had learned to survive betrayal, to honor love, to trust my instincts, and to live fully despite unimaginable loss. And in that understanding, I found the most important truth of all. Emily's love had never left me. It had only grown, shaped by challenge and tempered by endurance, guiding me towards clarity and peace I had never known before. The months that followed brought a quiet, hard-earned stability. I had learned to navigate my life without letting fear dominate it. Yet the memory of Jessica's betrayal remained a constant reminder of what vigilance truly meant. It wasn't about paranoia. It was about awareness, discernment, and the ability to honor Emily's warnings without letting them control me. Every choice I made carried the echoes of her guidance, every cautious step a testament to her foresight. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Emily's former colleague, Claire, someone I had met only briefly before Emily died. She spoke hesitantly at first, but I quickly realized she had been holding back information for months, unsure how much I could handle. She revealed that Emily had confided in her about subtle threats, cryptic messages, unexplained financial requests, and persistent manipulation from someone close to her. Claire had initially dismissed it as stress or paranoia, but now she saw the pattern too clearly. Her words hit me like a shockwave. Emily had not been exaggerating. She had been meticulous, cautious, and proactive. And yet her concerns had been underestimated by almost everyone around her. Hearing it from someone else added weight to the warning I had already received. The danger Emily had sensed was real, pervasive, and calculated. Over the following weeks, I worked closely with the detective again, reviewing every piece of evidence, connecting dots I hadn't noticed before. Emily's journals, the hidden video, the recordings, financial records, even casual notes she had left for herself, they all fit together into a pattern of calculated coercion. Jessica's influence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, methodical, and insidious. Emily had known she couldn't rely on anyone to intervene unless she left a trail. That trail had brought me here. The detective finally called with news I had been anticipating but dreaded. "We have enough to reopen some charges," he said. "Financial coercion and evidence of tampering with her vehicle. The case against Jessica is stronger than ever." I felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. Relief because justice was catching up, and exhaustion because the battle had consumed nearly every facet of my life for more than a year. But I also felt resolve. Emily's foresight had prepared me for this moment. I would see it through to the end, for her. Around that time, I started receiving small, unexpected gestures that reminded me of Emily's presence in my daily life. A note tucked inside a book I was reading, left there by her parents. They wanted you to remember joy. A familiar scent in the air while walking through her favorite park. An old song playing on the radio, the lyrics coincidentally echoing her voice. These moments were fleeting but potent, reinforcing the idea that her guidance didn't end with the warning. It continued, quietly, persistently, in ways I had only begun to notice. At home, I reorganized the study, making it a combination of memorial and workspace. Her journals and sketches occupied a prominent space, while my own notes, documents, and photographs of us together filled the rest. It became a place of reflection, planning, and quiet communion with her memory. Sitting there, I often whispered my thoughts aloud, as if she were in the room, listening and guiding. It was a strange, comforting ritual, and one that gradually brought me peace. The legal proceedings against Jessica moved slowly, but momentum was building. Each new piece of evidence, each corroborating witness reinforced what I already knew. Emily had been strategic, aware, and courageous. Jessica's carefully curated facade was cracking, and the truth was finally emerging from the shadows. One particularly quiet evening, I revisited the hidden video for what felt like the 100th time. Watching Emily's face, calm but resolute, I reflected on how much her foresight had shaped my survival. "Don't trust Jessica," she had said, and because I had listened, I had not only protected myself, but also honored her final wishes. That realization settled over me like warmth. Her warning had been terrifying, yes, but it had also been empowering. It had taught me to see clearly, act decisively, and navigate the world without allowing fear to dominate me. Around the same time, I began volunteering at a local support group for people who had lost loved ones under suspicious or traumatic circumstances. I didn't speak often, but when I did, I shared what I had learned. Trust your instincts, document what matters, and always, always honor the warnings and signs left behind. People listened, nodded, shared their own experiences. For the first time, my grief felt like it could serve a purpose beyond my own survival. Emily's lesson was spreading, quietly, through the lives of others. At home, I started to write more intentionally, not just journals or reflections, but a narrative of Emily's life and the warning she had left me. It wasn't meant for the world, it was meant to preserve the truth, to honor her foresight, and to ensure that her voice remained unaltered by time or misinterpretation. Each word felt sacred, a testament to her courage, intelligence, and love. One late afternoon, I walked through the park where Emily and I had spent countless hours together. The air was crisp, the sunlight warm on my face. I paused by a bench where we had once shared quiet afternoons, and I felt her presence as clearly as I had in the hidden video. Her voice was in my mind. Pay attention, trust yourself, live fully. I sat there for a long while, reflecting on how far I had come. The man I was 18 months ago, the man consumed by grief, fear, and vulnerability, felt distant, almost unrecognizable. I had grown, not just through pain, but through listening, observing, and acting. Emily had left me a warning, yes, but she had also left me the tools to reclaim my life, and I had. By the time the final appeals and court proceedings concluded, Jessica had been held accountable on multiple counts. She was sentenced, though not for everything I had hoped. Still, justice had been served, in part because I had listened, acted, and refused to let fear silence me. After the last court date, I returned home and sat at the desk in the study. I placed the hidden video and Emily's journals carefully in a drawer, knowing that while the world had seen the truth, this part of our story would remain private, sacred. I realized that Emily's message had never been just a warning about a single person. It was a lesson in discernment, courage, and resilience, and it had transformed my life. That night, I opened the window and watched the stars emerge in the sky. The world was vast, unpredictable, and sometimes cruel, but it was also beautiful. I thought about Emily's voice, her calm determination, her love. I whispered quietly, as if she could hear me. I listened, I acted, I lived. Thank you. For the first time in nearly 2 years, I slept through the night without fear. The past, the grief, the betrayal, the uncertainty, was still a part of me, but it no longer controlled me. Emily's guidance had done what she intended. It had prepared me to survive, to see clearly, and to live fully in the aftermath of loss. The house, once a place of shadows and doubt, felt alive again. I could move through it without flinching. I could remember Emily without pain twisting the memories. I could carry her lessons forward, not as a burden, but as a gift. Her warning, "Don't trust Jessica," had been terrifying when I first heard it, but over time it became something more profound, a symbol of love, foresight, and resilience. It reminded me that even in the darkest moments, clarity and courage can guide us, and those who truly care will leave us the tools we need to survive and thrive. Emily's voice would always be with me, a quiet compass steering me through the uncertainties of life, and I had finally learned to follow it. The months that followed were quieter than anything I had experienced since Emily died, but they were not empty. Life had a new texture now, one shaped by awareness, remembrance, and careful living. I still felt the shadow of what had happened, the weight of betrayal and grief, but it no longer crushed me. Instead, it sharpened me, taught me to recognize danger and to value love and trust when they were genuine. I often returned to Emily's study, now my sanctuary. The journals, letters, and videos she had left behind were not just reminders of her fear, they were guides, blueprints for resilience. I had learned to read her notes not as desperate cries, but as instructions, quiet beacons pointed toward clarity, caution, and courage. Each time I revisited them, I found new insights, small lessons I had missed before. It was as if she had anticipated that healing wouldn't be immediate and had prepared me for every stage of it. Her parents and I became closer than ever. We shared dinners, memories, and long walks, talking about Emily not as a lost figure, but as someone whose presence continued to shape our lives. Her laughter, her kindness, her insight, all of it remained alive through the stories we told, the objects we preserved, and the daily choices we made in her honor. These moments brought a gentle comfort, a steady reassurance that her influence had not been erased by death or by Jessica's betrayal. One day, while sorting through old files, I found a small envelope I had overlooked before. Inside was a single folded piece of paper in Emily's handwriting. "Daniel, you are stronger than you know. Life will throw shadows at you, but you will always find the light if you remember who you are and what we shared. Trust yourself and never forget to live fully." I read the note over and over, the words sinking in deeper each time. There was a clarity in her message that cut through every lingering fear, every trace of doubt. It was a reminder that her warning about Jessica had not been an isolated caution. It had been part of a larger lesson about vigilance, love, and personal integrity. Emily's foresight was profound. She had anticipated that even after the immediate threat was gone, life would still present challenges that could test me. Her words were meant to fortify me for the long journey ahead. That evening, I went to Emily's favorite park. The sun was setting, spilling golden light across the trees and the path we used to walk together. I sat on a bench and closed my eyes, letting the sounds of the wind and distant laughter wash over me. I imagined her beside me, her hand brushing lightly against mine, a reassuring presence reminding me that I was not alone. I whispered quietly, "I see you. I hear you. I understand now. Thank you." In the months that followed, I began rebuilding the life Emily had once shared with me, not as a replacement for what I had lost, but as an evolution of it. I returned to hobbies I had abandoned, reconnected with friends, and found new projects that challenged and inspired me. I embraced the ordinary moments, the small joys, knowing that every day I lived fully was a tribute to Emily's courage and guidance. Jessica was behind bars, serving her sentence, but I didn't dwell on that. Justice had been done in the ways that mattered. She was held accountable, and her ability to harm others was neutralized. Holding on to anger would have allowed her to continue controlling my thoughts. Instead, I focused on rebuilding, on honoring Emily, and on nurturing a life that was no longer defined by fear or betrayal. Sometimes, late at night, I would watch the hidden video again, not out of obsession, but for connection. Seeing Emily's face, hearing her calm, deliberate voice reminded me of the power of foresight, courage, and love. Her warning, once terrifying, had become a source of strength. I had survived because I listened, acted, and trusted my instincts. I had not only honored her warning, but also the deeper lesson she had embedded in every word, every note, every gesture. Over time, the quiet ache in my chest softened into gratitude. I was grateful for Emily's guidance, for the ability to survive betrayal, for the clarity she had left behind. I was grateful for her parents and friends who had stood beside me, for Mark's unwavering support, and for the small victories of ordinary life that reminded me what it meant to keep moving forward. Looking back on the 18 months that had begun with fear, loss, and uncertainty, I realized how transformative the experience had been. The hidden video was not just a warning about Jessica, it was a lesson about resilience, vigilance, and love. Emily had trusted me to carry that lesson forward, and in doing so, she had ensured that her wisdom would outlive even the darkest chapters of our lives. I knew now that life would continue to bring challenges, small and large, predictable and unpredictable, but I had learned to face them with the clarity Emily had instilled in me. Fear was no longer paralyzing, suspicion was no longer consuming. Love and memory had been woven into my resilience. One quiet evening, as I sat in Emily's study, I placed her bracelet back on the desk next to the journals and the letters she had left behind. I spoke softly as if she were there with me. "I lived. I trusted myself. I honored you, and I will keep doing so." For the first time in years, the house felt alive in a way that wasn't haunted. It was filled with memory, yes, but also with life, presence, and purpose. Emily's warning had guided me through one of the darkest periods of my life. But her love, wisdom, and foresight had done something even more profound. They had given me the tools to live fully, courageously, and deliberately, even after unimaginable loss. I breathed deeply, feeling the weight of the past loosen slightly in my chest. Emily's story, her warning, and her foresight had not ended in tragedy. They had ended in transformation, and I would honor that every day of my life.